Okay. Good morning. Welcome to Monday. I don't know if I asked this, but did anyone do anything fun on the weekend? Fun weekend, David? Not a fun weekend? It was a short weekend? Yeah. Mir, what about you? How was the weekend? Kind of chilled out? Yeah. Regina? Exciting weekend? Yeah? What'd you do? Okay. That's fun. That's fun. What about me? What did I do? Well, actually, it was kind of exciting. We went to pick up my fiance's engagement ring so we wanted to kind of pick it out together, but I wanted to surprise her. So when I proposed to her, I got her just like a kind of a cheap ring, just to as a placeholder for the real one. So I gave her that one December, January, 4 months ago, I guess. And so we finally got the real one on Saturday morning, which is quite nice. And I'm glad that we waited, because the one that I bought her is not at all like the one that she actually chose in the end. So that way I didn't have to make that decision. She could make that decision. But so we did that. We watched Encanto. I did a bunch of schoolwork. Encanto was great. Really enjoyed that. I think that was kind of it. It was kind of a quiet weekend. Well, Saturday morning was fun, but it wasn't huge. What else? I cleaned the garage out a bit. That was okay, I guess. Yeah. That's fine. That's fine. Okay. It's not as fun as shopping. So let's hop back in. So of course, all we can hear about in the news right now is Russia, and of course now when we come to history class, all we'll hear about is Russia. So it'll be all Russia all the time for a little while. But today we're gonna review what we talked about on Friday about how the Russian Revolution kind of comes about. We'll learn a few more details. I have an article for us to read that talks a little bit about the significance of this event. And here I'm saying just a couple things, that it completely changes the history of Russia, and it's also the first kind of appearance of a new political and economic system, which is a big deal, right? Because we don't really invent new political or economic systems every day, do we? No, right? We're pretty much stuck with, the 3 or 4 that we have. And so it's kind of a big deal that this one kind of makes it into the modern world and is starting to be practiced. We said that the time period we're in the early 1900s, Russia's kind of, it's not a very prosperous country, okay? It's a big country, of course. Russia's huge. It's got a lot of people in it, but almost everyone is kind of living a very simple farming existence. There's a little bit of industrialization. There's a little bit of factory work going on, not a huge amount. And Russia is a monarchy, right? So they have a czar and a bunch of kind of nobles at the top of society. But even though the czar and the nobles are quite wealthy and they own all the land, most of the people don't really own any land or have any wealth to speak of, right? They're quite poor. And of course, they're quite unhappy as well. They've been unhappy for some time. They've been suffering food shortages and things for some time. But then, of course, they're going to get themselves involved in World War I, right? We know that Archduke Franz Ferdinand is going to be killed. The Austro-Hungarians are going to want to make Serbia pay for it. But fortunately for Serbia, and unfortunately for Russia, Serbia and Russia are allies, right? And so Russia is going to be pulled into this fight right in 1914. And they're going to be involved in World War I for 3 long years. They're not really prepared for it, and they're not really capable of fighting a war like this. If you remember from a month or so ago, we said that World War I is not about really strategy. It's really just about who can produce more, right? Who can keep throwing resources and weapons and men at the fight, right? And whoever kind of runs out of stuff first is who's going to lose. And again, Russia's not really equipped for this kind of war because their production levels are quite low to begin with, right? They're kind of running out of food in the best of times, right? And so when Russia gets involved in this kind of war, they just can't compete, right? They don't really have the weapons, they don't have the supplies, they don't have the technology. All they have is people. And so they just throw as many people at this effort as they can. Millions die, of course, which is quite tragic and awful. And so by the time we get to kind of the early 1900s, in the midst of World War I, the Russians are pretty unhappy for the most part. And this guy here is going to take that unhappiness and he's going to use it to his advantage, right? So you can see him here. He's actually not going to live very long. He's only going to be 54 when he dies. But when World War II starts, you can see he's about 44 years of age, right? And so he's a kind of an intellectual. He's read things. He's studied. One of the things he's read, of course, is Karl Marx, right? The Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. He thinks Marx and his ideas are just great. And so he wants to put them into practice in Russia, right? He thinks that this is a solution to Russia's problems. So I asked you to read this section of the textbook. It was a little on the long side, but I'll kind of help you through it, or I'll try and help you remember here. So the first question I asked you was the cause of the Russo-Japanese War. Do you have that there, Mir? I know I'm kind of just dropping this on you out of nowhere, but what was the cause of the Russo-Japanese War in 1904 and 1905? Or did that question kind of come out of nowhere? Did it come out of nowhere? Okay, that's all right. Regina, do you want to take a crack at that one? Yep. Yeah, so the Russians have kind of imperial ambitions in Asia, plus they want to access the raw materials that are in Manchuria, the kind of northeastern part of China. But of course, we know that the Japanese have kind of the same idea, right? And so they get into a conflict over this particular area of Eastern Asia. And then, of course, the Japanese will unexpectedly win, which is kind of interesting. Well, I don't know. Do you think we have a similar situation on our hands now? Russia's fighting Ukraine. Ukraine really should not win. They're the much smaller country, but they're holding them off. Anyway, let's try to not get too tangled up in present things here. But yeah, Japan is going to win, right? Unexpectedly. Japan's going to feel great about this, right? Because never has kind of a smaller Eastern Asian power defeated a Western power. Huge deal, right? And of course, they get access to the resources that they've been wanting, right? So this is a huge benefit for the Japanese, but for the Russians, and particularly for the Tsar, it is bad news, right? The Tsar's got to come home and say, sorry guys, you know that little tiny country out in Asia that we were gonna, kick their butts? Well, they kind of beat us, right? That isn't gonna look very good for the Tsar. And of course, the peasants are already unhappy with him as it is. And now he's come home and he's lost this war that they really should have won, right? So discontent in Russia increases, right? Something happens on Bloody Sunday. What happens on Bloody Sunday? David, can I go to you for this? There's blood. I'll give you a hint. It's on Sunday. That's another hint. Yep. 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 There's a labor demonstration at the in front of the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. And where's the blood come from? Yeah. Yeah, so they were kind of marching on the Winter Palace. They were demonstrating. A few of the palace guards got a little nervous, right, as sometimes happens, shot a bunch of the protesters, and again, that makes the people even more upset, right, and even more angry. We said, of course, number 4 here, we said that Russia's economy is, not only are the peasants unhappy, but the economy is kind of not happening, right? Everybody's kind of a farmer. They're not farming using really modern techniques. It's very kind of simple, basic agriculture. They're not really fertilizing their fields or anything like this, so their yields are quite low. They're not really growing enough food to feed themselves. Their industrial production is low. They have natural resources, but instead of developing themselves, which costs money to do, you make more money later, but you have to actually put money into it. They've kind of just sold them off to foreign investors, right? It's like, oh, here we have a lot of silver on our land, but okay, you guys, the British, come in and you mine it and just give us some money for it, right? And again, they get some money from that, but you really make more money by developing your own resources, right? Then you kind of create jobs within your own country, right? People have jobs, they buy things, they pay taxes, and you get an economy going, right? But if you just sell off your stuff, then it's just kind of a one-time payment. You don't make a lot of money that way. And so Russia's really fallen behind in terms of industrialization. They've fallen behind in terms of kind of maximizing their natural resources, and as a result, they've kind of accumulated a lot of foreign debt, right? And so again, their economy is just not in a good place, right? Not in a good place at all. So that brings us to the Russian Revolution, right? And so let me just see what I have here. Yeah, so the Russo-Japanese War, the effects, Bloody Sunday, economy. Okay. So this revolution is going to happen for a few reasons, okay? Number 1 is that the Romanovs, that's the kind of royal family that's in charge. Tsar Nicholas is a Romanov. The Romanovs aren't doing a very good job ruling Russia, right? So they're kind of more interested in their riches and their wealth, right? They're living a very kind of royal lifestyle with tons and tons of money. They're very out of touch with the life of the average Russian. And to be honest, they don't really care that much, right? David, were you saying last week about the let them eat cake thing? Was that you? No? Oh, I thought somebody else. Was it Kenny saying that? Yeah. Yeah, so he was saying that there was this, during the French Revolution, there was, the people were in the streets protesting, saying, we have nothing to eat, we want bread. And Marie Antoinette, the wife of the King of France, reportedly said, oh, they want bread, well, let them have cake, right? And she's like, yeah, she doesn't care, right? Let them eat whatever they want. But they're saying, we have no food, right? Give us food. And so I don't think she actually ever said that. But even so, this is kind of the attitude of the Romanovs too. They don't really care too much about the average person, right? They don't care too much about the average people. We also have problems in terms of, not only do they not care, but while the Tsar is away during wartime, so in World War I, the Tsar goes off to lead the armies to victory. There's no victory, but he goes off to lead them. And his wife, whose name I forget, it's not Katerina, it's Alexandra, I think. His wife Alexandra is kind of under the control of a mystic called Rasputin, right? So Rasputin is this guy who shows up and he pretends to have sort of mystical mind-reading powers kind of thing. The Tsar's wife kind of believes this, right? She thinks, oh, this guy is powerful. And he starts to kind of manipulate her, right? And so for a while, he's kind of in charge of things. He's just kind of like pulling the strings on the wife of the Tsar, right? Until some nobles familiar with the situation murder him because he's bad for business, that guy. But even so, the country's not being run very well because it's being run by this crazy kind of faith healer guy. Again, we said that agriculture wasn't really working, and all of those protests, all of those labor protests that were going on, Bloody Sunday that David told us about, nobody's really doing anything about it, right? The workers want labor legislation, right? They want laws that will protect them. They want safety standards, right, to protect them in their factory work. And the government's not really doing anything about it, right? Everybody's upset. Everybody's angry. Nothing's happening, right? Nothing is changing. Meanwhile, it's okay. Meanwhile, there's a war going on, right? There's a war going on that Russia is not really equipped to fight, right? They don't have the resources to fight a war like this, but they're in it anyway. So again, that will, but wait, there's more. They have very weak infrastructure, right? They have very little in terms of railway systems. Keep in mind that that's how you move goods in this period. There's really no roads. Cars and trucks aren't really a thing yet. And so if you want to move things across the country, you have to use the rail, you have to use trains, you have to use the railway. But Russia doesn't really have a lot of railway, and it's a big country, right? So they're not really able to move their goods very well. Their population is increasing, but they're not really producing any more food. And again, World War I is not going well for them, right? And so that will bring us to maybe the first step in what's happening here. And that's where the Tsar is convinced to step down, okay? So a little bit earlier, we said that they had, the Tsar had created the Duma, right? And the Duma was kind of a legislative body, right? So if you're familiar with democracy, here we have the House of Commons in Canada. That's where all the government ministers or the government representatives sit and vote on things. In the States, they have Congress, right, or the House of Representatives. Here in Russia, they create the Duma, right? And the Duma is supposed to share power with the Tsar, right? That relationship doesn't work very well. The Tsar really doesn't want to share his power anyway, and so it doesn't really function. But eventually things get so bad that the Tsar is convinced that he should abdicate, he should step down, which he does. And then all we have is the Duma, right? And so the Duma sets up a provisional government. What does provisional mean? Provisional. There you go, Mir. What's it say? What's provisional mean? Something that's kind of arranged or is created just for the present situation, right? It'll be fixed a little later, right? So something provisional is something temporary, just for the time, you know, and we'll get it perfect later, but we just need something. And so the Russians do this, right? The Tsar steps down and they set up a temporary government, a provisional government. And part of the government's job is A, to run the country, right? But B, they're going to try and create a constitution, okay? What's a constitution? This is an important thing. What's a constitution?
Something is built invented that help humans
Mm-hmm.
become the education is more natural. And not just benefit, right? I don't know.
It does benefit for sure. It's a huge benefit if you have one. The way I like to think of a constitution is, you guys have played board games, right? Monopoly, whatever, Life, Clue, whatever it is. You guys have all played board games, and the constitution is basically the book of rules for a country, okay? So here in Canada, we have a thing called Canada. We're all playing the game, a game called Canada, right? We're all players in the game of Canada. And the Constitution is basically the rules, right? The basic rules of the game, okay? So in Canada, the Constitution says a lot of things, but the most important things it does is this. It defines what the government, how the government is structured, okay? So here, just like in Britain, we have 3 branches to our government, right? We have a legislative branch, the branch that makes laws. We have an executive branch, that's the branch that runs the government. And then we have a judicial branch, right? And this is the law court, the law court system, okay? And so the Constitution says there's those 3 branches. It gives powers to those branches. It says what they can do and what they can't do. And our Constitution has a charter of rights and freedoms as well. So it tells citizens what their rights and freedoms are, okay? And so all the other laws that we pass, all the other criminal laws, like, you know, you can't murder people, all the tax laws, right? The laws that say who pays taxes, every other law has to be aligned with the Constitution, right? If it's not, then it's unconstitutional, right? And it can't exist. So the Constitution is like the basic rules of the game. They're the highest rules in Canada, and any other rules we make have to be with respect to the Constitution. They have to be in alignment with them, okay? And so that's what the provisional government is trying to do. The Tsar has stepped down, right? And so they're trying to create the rules for Russia, right? How will Russia run? What will the government look like? How will the government work? What powers will the government have? What powers will the government not have, right? And so they've got to write all this stuff up and figure it out. And it's not an easy thing, right? Creating a constitution is not simple, right? So the provisional government is kind of in the process of trying to do that. In the midst of trying to do that, there is a lot of upheaval, and there's probably a little bit too much detail here for us, right? So we're talking about there's a couple of different coalitions, right? Sorry, I'm just trying to see what my slides here. There's a couple of different coalitions, right? There's a couple of different government ministers who are kind of fighting for power. Sometimes they're aligned with each other, sometimes they're fighting with each other. That's too much detail for us, I think, okay? So you'll probably remember reading about General Lvov and Alexander Kerensky. And again, those guys are kind of jockeying for power, if you will, okay? But still, they're creating a lot of instability within the government itself. So the government is trying to deal with this disastrous war effort. They're trying to write a constitution. These guys are battling it out for who's going to be in charge of the government, right? Kind of who's going to be prime minister. So there's a lot of kind of tension and turmoil. And then along comes this guy, okay? Here he is reading a copy of the major Russian newspaper of the time, Pravda. Pravda is Russian for truth. During Soviet times, it will print anything but truth. But for now, it's called Truth, Pravda. So that will bring us to Lenin and his Bolsheviks, okay? So the Bolsheviks are a political party. Lenin is the head of that party. And he is advocating for kind of social revolution, right? He wants a big change in Russia. And he kind of gains attention of the population. He gains the attention of the population with a very simple slogan: peace, land, bread. What do you think he's promising the people? What's the peace part of that? What do you think the promise is there? What's that? What does the peace represent here? What is he promising the people? Remember, they're involved in a war. No more war, right? He's going to get Russia out of the war, right? That's the peace. What's the bread? Food, right? The Russians are suffering food shortages all the time. They're starving. Lenin is like, yeah, we're gonna have food. I promise you bread. I promise you an end to food shortage. What do you think the land is? What do you think his promise there is? Okay. Give me a little more than that. Yes. What's that? Say again? Yeah. Keep in mind that at this time, basically only the nobles own the land, okay? So the rich, the dukes and duchesses and people like that, they're the ones that own the land in Russia. Almost everybody else, all those poor farmers, they don't own anything, right? They don't own the land that they work. They work the land that belongs to the noble, and then they give him 30% of their harvest just for the privilege of farming the noble's land, right? So the people want their own land. They don't want to be paying a huge chunk of their harvest to the nobles. They want their land. And Lenin's promising that, right? Peace, land, bread. We're going to get out of the war. I'm going to redistribute land to the people. And there's going to be an end to food shortages. There's going to be an end to hunger and starvation. And as you can imagine, those are things that people want, right? It's a very simple slogan, which is probably good for slogans that they're simple. But it is what the people are looking for, right? This is what the people want. Now, how this works. There's a revolution in 1905, right? And so the Duma is created. I mentioned this, but it doesn't really work. Doesn't really work very well, right? World War I, again, not going well. 4 million Russians are killed in the first year alone. Never mind the next 3. And Russia's not equipped for this war. They're suffering through it. There's a February Revolution here in 1917, and that's when the Tsar steps down, okay? So finally the leader of the country, the monarch, says, okay, the people are unhappy, they really don't want me, so I step down, and the Duma takes over as a provisional government, right? They're trying to run the country, they're trying to create a new constitution, and they're trying to deal with the war effort, right? There's a couple of coalitions, which again, we don't really need to go into. People are jockeying for power, but a moment occurs which that second coalition collapses, okay? So this infighting between Kerensky and Lvov creates chaos and uncertainty, and Lenin will see his moment to strike. Okay? Again, he's gained popularity with the people through this very simple set of promises. And he's also gotten a lot of support from the Soviets. What did we say Soviets were? They're groups of workers that, what are they? Yeah, they're kind of like, you know, like a city government, you have a municipal government, like a mayor and councilors and things. The Soviets are kind of like that, but they're not official, right? A mayor and councilors, those are official municipal governments. These ones are kind of unofficial, but things are so chaotic in the cities that these workers' councils are created, right? They vote people onto them, and then they start organizing and running the cities. And again, the people, for the most part, like this because people don't really enjoy chaos, right? People like it when things actually work the way they're supposed to, right? It's nice when you call the fire department if the fire department actually shows up, right? If you're in danger and you call the police, it's nice that the police show up, right? It's nice that somebody is kind of in charge of your city, right? And so people support these Soviets. They like the Soviets, right? The Soviets are kind of bringing back some sort of order to their cities. And Lenin says, all power to the Soviets, right? If he gets into power, he's going to make those Soviets into legitimate authorities, right? They'll have actual power, not just, you know, they're just kind of doing it because nobody else is doing it. But he promises that he's going to give power to them. And so they support him as well, right? They support Lenin as well. Now in October of 1917, again, Lenin sees his opportunity, right? There's a lot of confusion in the government. Kerensky and Lvov are fighting back and forth. And so Lenin, with his Bolshevik party, and with the backing of the Moscow and the St. Petersburg Soviets, they seize control of the government, okay? So, unlike our friend Hitler, Hitler kind of gets voted in, right? Hitler tries to take over the government with guns. He fails, right? He goes to jail. And then he decides, well, we're going to have to get voted in. That's the only way we're going to gain power. But here, Lenin actually succeeds in overthrowing the government by force, right? He and his Bolshevik Red Army show up with guns. They show up to the Winter Palace and to the Duma and a few other locations, and they take control of them. They arrest members of the provisional government. They throw them in jail. And now Vladimir Lenin is the leader of Russia, just like that. And so I want to pay attention to this because sometimes the way we think about Russia and communism and the Soviet Union, we think about it a little bit differently. But remember what Karl Marx said, right? In his Communist Manifesto, he said that what was eventually going to happen is that the workers, the proletariat, they would see that they were being exploited, right? You guys working in my travel mug factory and working for minimum wage while I make millions of dollars a year on the profits, eventually you would say, you know what? This isn't fair. We're just making minimum wage. We're working hard. And the profit of our labor is just going to this doofus right up here, right? We're not getting any of that. That's not fair. He's exploiting us. And so eventually you guys would say, forget this. You're going to overthrow me, right? You're going to throw me out in the street, the bourgeoisie. You're going to take control of the travel mug factory. And that $1 million of profit, you're going to split it amongst yourselves, right? Because that's fair, right? These things are being produced by your labor, and you deserve to see the benefit, right? You deserve to see the fruit of that labor, okay? That's what Karl Marx said would happen. Eventually, the proletariat, the worker, would have a class consciousness. They would see themselves as one group who were being exploited, and they would overthrow those people on the top, right? But that's not really what happened here, is it? The bourgeoisie did not overthrow the proletariat. He actually, he did a coup d'etat, right? He overthrew the state with violence, right? He and his political party went in with guns and arrested everybody. That's not really a communist revolution, right? That's an overthrow of the state. That's a coup d'etat by communists, but it's not really a communist revolution, right? Because Marx said that the communist revolution comes from the bottom, right? The people will say, we're being exploited, we need to overthrow these guys. But the people didn't really think that, right? The people didn't really overthrow anyone. It was Lenin, right? And it was the Bolsheviks. So what I want to do, well, we'll take a break first, but what I'd like to do when we get back is talk about this cause and consequence, right? Because part of the historian's job is to describe things that happened, but also to think about why they happened, and maybe even what might have occurred if they didn't happen, okay? And we said that the Russian Revolution was incredibly important to world history, and even the things that are happening right this very minute on the other side of the world are very connected to the Russian Revolution. But I'd like us to read this short article and talk about what if the Russian Revolution had never happened? What kind of a world would we live in? Okay, so we'll take a break, but when we get back, we will we'll read this short article, kind of interesting, and we'll answer these 4 questions. Okay, and question 4 might be very interesting to think about given what's happening in that part of the world right now. But for now, let's take a little break, and then when we come back, we'll start reading this, okay? All right, and we are back. So, like I promised, I have a short article for you to read talking about this very question, right? Is that what if the Russian Revolution had never happened, right? We said it was a significant event, but this article will help us think about just how big a deal it actually was, okay? So, again, the article is in Microsoft Teams under Readings, and there's 4 questions here which I'll leave on the screen, but they're also at the end of the article as well. So I'll let you start reading, and then I'll check in with you as we go, okay? Yeah, so there we go. Start reading, please.
go back.
How's the reading going there, guys? Any questions about words or phrases? He's kind of a flowery writer. You know, he uses a lot of, well, a few big words here and there, but is it okay? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. Take that as a yes. Okay, people, can we try and talk about this one a little bit? Okay, so the author's kind of looking around, and the author's writing this kind of on the anniversary of the Russian Revolution, right? So it takes place in October. It's October 25th, 1917. So he's writing here a few years ago in 2017, kind of looking back at the Russian Revolution, but also seeing that there are some reflections of what happened in the past that are still kind of around in the modern world. And Mir, what's one thing that he sees? Something in the modern world that is reflective of that revolution.
China being a hyperpower.
Okay, and China being a hyperpower, and of course its government is a communist one. Is a communist government. Yeah. So yeah, we still have a major power that is communist, and largely I think because of the existence of the Soviet Union and the revolution that created it, right? Yeah, that's one thing. Regina, what's another thing that he sees? Right, yeah, he's kind of thinking about, had the Soviet Union never existed, then Mao probably wouldn't have really existed. Well, he would have existed, but he wouldn't have been a communist, and he wouldn't have managed to gain power in China, right? It would still, who knows, maybe it would still be the Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek or whoever came after him that would be ruling China. Who knows what China would look like today, right? What else does he see in the modern world? Ryan, what do you think?
What they were inspired?
Sorry, who was? Okay, okay. Which events were inspired by it? Or people? The what, sorry? Okay. What do you mean exactly? I'll come back to you in just a minute. David, what do you think? Something in the modern world that is reflective of the Russian Revolution? Oh, okay. Okay, so we have the existence of North Korea, which is kind of built on a platform of, it's a dictatorship, right? And built on kind of Leninist principles, right? And of course, that dictatorship is supported by China, which is also kind of connected to the Russian Revolution. So yeah, both of those countries are connected. Ryan, what do you think? Yeah, that is true, right? And it's not just countries either, right? It's political leaders, and he mentions Jeremy Corbyn from the UK. He mentions Steve Bannon, who was a campaign advisor to Trump, and he mentions Trump himself, right? These guys who, who play the political game with kind of a win or lose mentality, right? And they'll do or say whatever they need to do to achieve their goals, right? And Lenin was very much like this, right? He was very much open to doing whatever he needed to do in order to win and gain power, right? And so not only do a number of countries still exist that are, sort of connected to the Russian Revolution, but we have current political leaders who are either operating like Lenin did, or they're coming right out and saying, I'm a Leninist, right? Steve Bannon says, I'm a Leninist. So, yeah, even though this event was 100 years ago, there's still countries and people that are being inspired or influenced by what happened, right? The author said that this revolution is kind of interesting because if you remember, we were talking about Hitler, and we read that section of the textbook that talked about why did he succeed, right? How did Hitler come to power? And in that section of the textbook, it gave us a few arguments, right? Was it Hitler himself, right? Was he just so charismatic that he gained power? Was it that the Germans kind of wanted a strong man in power, and so they would have elevated anyone who kind of fit that status? Was the Nazis kind of a grassroots democracy movement that came about? Either way, the idea is that, it was inevitable, right? It was inevitable that Germany would produce some kind of dictator, whether it was Hitler or someone else. Someone would have been put into that position. But here, I kind of feel like the author is saying that this wasn't really an inevitability, right? It wasn't a sure thing. It wasn't something that, of course, it was going to happen sooner or later. It seems to be a weird event, right? That just spontaneously happened and succeeded, right? Because he says that this revolution was probably unlikely to succeed. And what's a reason for that, Regina? Why was this revolution unlikely to succeed? In Russia. Okay. I'll go to Mir. What do you think? Why was this revolution unlikely to succeed? There's a few reasons. Or anyone. What's that? Not sure? Brian, David, what do you think? Why was this revolution unlikely to succeed? Yeah, he was lucky, right? In a lot of ways. How was he lucky? Yeah, right. So he was out there speaking to the crowds, right? And somebody shot him, but fortunately, he survived. Well, for him, fortunately, he survived, right? Which again is not a sure thing, right? Medicine in 1918 wasn't the same as it is today. So he very easily could have died, but didn't die, right? How else was he lucky? How else was Lenin lucky? Well, it's true, right? everybody kind of had their hands full with other things, right? When he sort of took control of Russia, it was right in the middle of World War I, right? So people noticed, but they didn't really have the opportunity to do anything about it, right? What else? David, what do you think? How else was Lenin fortunate? How was he lucky? Okay, I'm going to press pause on this because I feel like everyone is kind of super tired. But I will show you this here. Show you this. Yeah, so Lenin, of course, is a huge figure in Russia and in the Soviet Union, right? He basically created the Soviet Union, right? His revolution created a communist country, and there were statues of him really everywhere, right? And when the Soviet Union kind of came apart in 1991, a lot of those statues were kind of torn down in the process, but a lot of them stayed up. And so this is the one, I don't know if I've told you, but I used to work in Russia when I was a grad student. And so I went there for 6 years in a row during the summers. And so I probably spent maybe 12 or 13 months total in Russia. And this is in the city I worked in. This is actually right in the center of town, this big statue of Lenin. It's what? That's not my photo. I have a photo of him somewhere, I'm sure, but this is just an internet photo. But that's him, and he's still there. But yeah, he's a huge figure in Russia. There's still statues of him. Although I think in Moscow and St. Petersburg, a lot of them have come down since then. The other thing I'll show you here, just give me 1 second here. Just want to see where it is. 31, 31, 31. The other thing, 29, okay. The other thing is that he's actually still there. So not only are there, I'm going to turn the lights up for this. Not only are there still statues around to Lenin, but Lenin himself is still in Russia. And so this is actually the tomb or the mausoleum of Lenin. And so it's in the middle of Moscow. It's in Red Square. I think what you see behind that, the yellow building behind, I think that's the Kremlin. So the sort of main government building where Vladimir Putin is doing all of the things he's doing right now. Right in the center of Moscow. And this is Lenin's tomb. And so you can see it says, well, maybe you can't see it, but it says Lenin right on the front. And if you go in, although I'm not sure if it's open at the moment, but if you go in, you'll actually see that he is still there. The real body. And so when he died, they took they took care to actually preserve him. And so I don't know how they do it. I don't know what the process is, but they have managed to keep him from decaying. I'm not quite sure what the process is. It's top secret, apparently, but he's still there, and you can go and see him, which is kind of creepy, hey? But for years he was, what's the word I'm looking for? Wasn't really a god, maybe like a father figure, a founding father But he was he was the reason for Soviet Russia in the first place, right? He was the one who overthrew the provisional government and created this thing, right? And again, even right up to today, I'm fairly certain you can still visit him. Actually, I'm just going to Google it and see. Lenin's tomb. Is it open? It opens at 10 a.m. Yeah, it's very short hours. It's only 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And it's closed on Monday, Friday, and Sunday. But you can still go and visit Lenin to this day if you so desire, even if it is a little creepy. Okay, guys, I think that's all I have for you today. I'll let you pack it up, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. We'll finish these other two questions, and then we'll move on with Lenin's death. Sorry, spoiler alert. Well, you saw he was dead, so it's not really a spoiler. Also, he'd be like, 150 years old, so we know he's dead. We'll talk about Lenin's death, and then we'll talk about Stalin, of course, who will succeed him, okay? So until then, that's all for today. Pack it up. See you tomorrow, okay?